Nice to see you again, stranger. I look forward to working with you.
When it comes to horror game coverage, I may be guilty of skewing this channel very Japanese. So today I wanted to take a look at a Western-developed horror game, one from the same era as the major Japanese breakthrough hits of the genre. So we're going to be taking a look at Terminal Reality's 1999 PC title, Nocturne. Why Nocturne specifically? Well, I'll get into that a little bit later. First of all, I have to say, the US box art for this game is badass. This black and white picture of some mysterious figures stood in an ominous, dark, lonely place gives me chills just looking at it. A great way to depict a game about the paranormal by having its cover look like a gritty, unnerving ghost sighting photo or something. It looks like a shot of some illicit footage we should not be looking at. Like, this game's gonna have some stuff you may not want to see. Turn back now. Much better than the European cover, going much more for a generic, young adult novel fantasy look. Anyway, I know you're all sat there now shaking. Not because you're afraid, necessarily, but because your butts are clenched in anticipation for me to slap a featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series sticker from the Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne cover on this box that says the word Nocturne on it too, so as to bring home the Devil May Cry reference cheers. Well, first off, chuckleheads, the version of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne to feature that infamous little advert was the European version, and over here, SMT Nocturne was called SMT Lucifer's Call. So that joke you're thinking of wouldn't work anyway. But yes, why is SMT Nocturne called SMT Lucifer's Call here in Europe? Well, probably because Ghostlight, the European publisher of SMT Nocturne, didn't want to license the name Nocturne from Terminal Reality, like Atlus had to do to use the suffix Nocturne in the US. See, Atlus had to credit this old PC game on the title screen of SMT Nocturne in America to use the name. I guess Ghostlight didn't want to sort that out for Europe, Lucifer's Call it is. I'm assuming Terminal Reality didn't own the trademark to Nocturne in Japan at least. So Nocturne, the PC horror game, is actually connected to Devil May Cry more than you people craving that DMC reference may have initially thought. SMT Nocturne in the US has to credit Nocturne on its title screen, and then Devil May Cry 3 has to credit Kazuma Kaneko, the artist of SMT Nocturne, on its title screen for doing the Devil Trigger designs for Dante in that game. Yeah, it's all coming up Galaxy Brain tonight. There's a lot more to the history of Nocturne. Again, the PC horror game, not the SMT game, but I think we should explain what it's actually about before we get into that. Nocturne stars the Stranger, an elusive and mysterious operative of the secret government organization, Spookhouse, who exists to covertly combat paranormal and fantastical threats throughout the world.
Who will protect the world from darkness?
We will.
At the start of the game, you get to roam around Spookhouse HQ and interact with your co-workers, and this did a great job at getting me invested in the game's world. They have a room with a doctor working on the bodies of different monsters, with one of them locked away in a cage for further research. Missing agent posters and monster sighting news stories litter the walls. And get this, there's a training room with some big demon bastard, a boxer with magic fist powers, and a Tibetan monk-looking martial arts master teaching them. Awesome. I'm all in at this point. The game is split into 4 standalone chapters that take place years apart and see the Stranger sent off to a different part of the world to solve some paranormal mystery, usually by way of his dual handguns. And this is like my favorite kind of setup. There's something about enigmatic, mysterious characters working out of some base of operations, going off to some mysterious place with weird inhabitants, and having to put their special set of skills to work in new and interesting circumstances that gets me pumped for the adventures ahead. It's almost the perfect setup to justify your cool protagonist going to an interesting new place and bouncing off crazy new characters and events, and even time periods, as Nocturne's levels take place years apart, between 1927 and 1935. Nocturne's narrative is complemented by pretty good voice acting for the average game from '99.
We think we've tracked down the artifact.
I always thought that it was just as much a myth as the Holy Grail.
What makes you think the Grail is a myth?
Stranger's actor nails the cynical, dismissive tone of a hardened secret agent.
I suppose I should tell you you'll have a partner on this mission.
A partner? Who?
Svetlana Lupescu. I know you really don't like us.
I don't like anyone. I hate monsters.
And the rest of the cast give earnest performances as well.
Yes, stranger. Let us spar. I don't think you'd like the outcome.
The performances ride the line really well between taking the characters seriously enough for them to come off likable, for them not to come across as mere parodies of the pulpy material the title is inspired by, while also being self-aware as to when to play things up to keep things fun.
Come on, Svetlana. He's crazy.
I'm crazy. You come here of your own free will. You're crazy.
Unfortunately, the cool extended cast of Nocturne doesn't get much time to shine in the spotlight of the main missions. You're teased with them more on your visits to Spookhouse between missions, but otherwise they don't make much of an appearance elsewhere. This is with the exception of Svetlana the Dampier, a half-vampire who comes with you on a dual mission to Germany for the first chapter of the game.
You have a new mission that you're not looking forward to. Though I can't imagine what objection you could have against any mission.
The Colonel assigned Svetlana as my partner.
Oh.
The stranger, being a rather fervent racist towards monsters, has to put his prejudice aside to work with this half-vampire, as they're tasked with venturing to a German castle where a vampire lord is causing havoc and may in fact be in possession of a powerful artifact that could enhance his otherworldly powers. Now, if you're familiar with another more popular series that came out a few years after Nocturne, you may notice a striking resemblance between Svetlana and another female half-vampire action hero. Yeah, that's right, Nocturne was created by the developers of BloodRayne. Now, the details are a bit hazy, but it seems like a follow-up to Nocturne was initially perhaps supposed to be an action game starring this half-vampire character. But since Terminal switched publishers when making this follow-up, they didn't want to hand over the Nocturne IP to this new publisher. And so they amended this follow-up to be just different enough to not be a direct Nocturne follow-up, while still including references and similarities to the world of Nocturne without being too specific and clear about it taking place in the Nocturne universe. They made a Dampier protagonist similar to the one in Nocturne, even making a castle level with the same name as the one in Nocturne's first chapter, and called the game BloodRayne. So while BloodRayne isn't officially a Nocturne successor, there's enough material and referencing there to where I guess you could headcanon it to be one. The developers leaving room open to retroactively put BloodRayne in the same universe as Nocturne at a later date, perhaps. But there is actually a follow-up to Nocturne that does explicitly take place in the same world and star the same cast of characters. Blair Witch Volume 1, Rustin Parr. Yeah, so Terminal Reality after Nocturne, but before BloodRayne, got given the rights to make a Blair Witch game, and opted to have Spookhouse and the characters from Nocturne be the ones to investigate the Blair Witch, circa the early 1940s. Now, I have never consumed a piece of Blair Witch media before this, so I couldn't tell you if this incredibly misses the point of Blair Witch or not, but sneaking your original characters into a licensed movie game to make an unofficial sequel to your own original game is a ballsy move for sure, right? If maybe not for the Blair Witch IP, for the Nocturne universe and the Spookhouse cast, I think it works well. A fitting paranormal phenomena for Spookhouse to take a look at. Stranger's characterization is only enhanced by his appearance here, as he refuses to go on a mission to fight ghosts.
I suppose I should have expected that reaction.
Yes, he doesn't like being sent anywhere he can't shoot something. You see, Svetlana, since Stranger has never found evidence to substantiate any of the Black Hills legends, Blair Witch or otherwise, the case is closed, as far as he's concerned.
If something's not there, it's not there. You can look all you want.
Like, you can't shoot a ghost, they're just invisible things that float around, who cares? I can't go trickster on a spirit.
Be sure and call me if you run into any actual monsters.
So instead, a Nocturne side character, Doc Holliday, goes on the mission to take on the Blair Witch instead of Stranger. Of course, they throw some zombies, or daymites in there too for good measure. To keep things gamey, it was still lore back then.
This must be where pies go when they die.
Oh, Dale Cooper's here too? Who isn't investigating the Blair Witch right now? Now, some of you may be shocked to learn of all these connections this weird-ass obscure survival horror Nocturne game has. Others familiar with Nocturne may not, but I bring it all up anyway because it's all this that drew me into playing Nocturne to begin with. Hearing echoes of this mysterious game in these other titles, discovering it has connections in places you just wouldn't expect, that despite not having a sequel itself, its world and universe continued in unexpected ways. Following the breadcrumb trail and other content around the web, back to Nocturne was quite an engaging mystery by itself.
BloodRayne. It was originally planned as a sequel to Terminal Reality's first non-monster truck related game, Nocturne.
BloodRayne was planned as a sequel to what?
It isn't even the first Blair Witch game. There were 3 others. The first one starts you off receiving weapons training from a kung fu master in a secret government facility.
Huh. Why would that be the case? Sounds weird. Sounds interesting. It's this kind of weird history and secret timeline of events that hooks me into wanting to discover and explore a game like Nocturne for myself. I wanted to see what it was all about. This game made reference to in other titles that I hadn't even heard of before these other projects that came out later. On top of that, the fact that it's a horror game made in the era of classic gaming horror, how could I say no? Something I didn't even know existed and have no expectations for. What better type of horror game to play? Discovering its existence through its lingering spirit years down the line feels intensely fitting for a game about searching out the paranormal. Here's where we get into the nitty-gritty though. Is Nocturne a good horror game? Is it worth your time? Well, the answer, like the game's history, is somewhat complicated. Nocturne has the fixed camera angles of a Resident Evil, but features much more action-heavy gameplay. You have far more mobility, you pick up loads of ammo, you have unlimited inventory space, and if you're smart, you'll have the almost required auto-aim on, as well as auto-healing activated, so Stranger will just consume further healing items himself when dealt with an otherwise fatal blow. It's a good thing you have this more mobile moveset, since enemies are much quicker and aggressive, and in much larger numbers than Resident Evil. Also, unlike classic Resi, enemies can have guns. Unfortunately, this increased focus on combat prowess isn't perhaps best suited to the completely static camera angles focused more on ambience and drama. A slower-paced game like Resident Evil handles better. Here you'll be running around trying to maneuver through faster and more enemies than Resi, some of them shooting at you, and the switching between cameras can get disorientating in the heat of the moment. I'm a big fan of fixed camera angles in horror. They can add a lot to the mood and visual style of the more considered atmosphere of a scary game, and Nocturne has some excellent ones too, though Nocturne suffers from the occasional angle that's going to have you running into trouble, of course. There's no ability to control the third-person camera like the impressively fully 3D rendered Silent Hill could offer earlier that same year, with its combining of fixed camera angles and controllable camera, since Nocturne features a lot of pre-rendered imagery that can presumably only be viewed directly at a specific angle. I forgive it for this more than Code Veronica, which came out a few months later and was fully 3D rendered, but featured no third-person camera control when it could have done. Nocturne throws a little extra help for this in though with a first-person ability, which sidesteps the issue of being unable to show pre-rendered material at different angles by displaying a primitive view of just the level boundaries and enemies with the excuse of it being a kind of night vision mode. A cool and valiant attempt to fix the visibility issues of fixed camera angles in a pre-rendered space, though a slightly cumbersome one, admittedly. I think perhaps Code Veronica could have benefited from featuring a first-person button, since it would have been easily capable of doing so, without having to trick it like Nocturne has to with its pre-renders. But that gets relegated there to a bonus minigame and some late-game weapons. So ultimately I let slide some of the cumbersomeness in Nocturne, since the camera angles give the game significant ambience and style, and there would be no way to alter the third-person camera oneself without sacrificing the pre-rendered detail, which does help intensify the game's vibe. Maybe that's me putting graphics over gameplay, but for a horror game, visual design can add up to being a big chunk of the experience. I think Nocturne works around its camera limitations in enough clever ways to not make it too frustrating, even though the pace is much faster than a classic Resi, and enemies can shoot you with guns from off-screen. All in all, Stranger's lock-on is pretty effective, and can enhance his badass zero-shits-given demeanor. When he locks onto an enemy he ain't even looking at and just goes to town on them. In these moments you feel like the ultimate monster-killing badass. That's during combat though. Environmental traversal can have you feeling like Stranger is 8 drinks in at 4 AM. I don't think I've ever encountered a horror game where tripping down stairs can get you killed. For some reason, because of how fall damage is calculated, I guess, running downstairs too fast and skipping a few can cause Stranger to take fall damage and sometimes die. So when approaching stairs, it's best to start walking and gingerly make your way down, which I must say ruins a lot of Stranger's calculated cool factor. The fear of falling comes in tandem with this game's addition of platforming to the Resident Evil horror style, which it does not handle gracefully, and for obvious reasons games like Resi and SH do not include such mechanics. In a scary game, you do not want the thing most likely to kill you to not be the monsters, and you will die more to falling than enemies, I guarantee. I think Terminal realized they kind of ballsed up this element of the game, because platforming does not make a return in Blair Witch. Take this jump for example. I need to do a running jump to make it over to this ledge, already not the easiest thing to do at the angle it's at. Problem is, after a running jump, Stranger will keep going for a bit, the momentum forcing him into the room I need to get to, where he'll fall in and die. But I'm a pro, so I eventually pulled it off. Anyway, let's see what's out here. Yeah, so quick saving is a must in this game. The ability to quick save and reload at any point in a game, instead of there being pre-placed checkpoints, and how it affects the difficulty and the way players approach each challenge is a long and interesting conversation to have, but perhaps not today. It is a puzzle that traps you in a no-win scenario. Bad design if your game has quick loading. Does the ability to load anywhere overshadow the balancing of a survival horror game's mechanics and challenge? There's a lot to talk about, but another time. What I will say is that without quick saving, the way the game is designed now, it would probably be unplayable, since there are so many insta-death tricks around pretty much every corner. So map that quick save close to you on the keyboard. Now keep in mind, this doesn't mean my every game is probably better with a jump function statements in the past are wrong. Platforming makes this game worse, not the ability to jump. Jumping here is awesome. Symphony of the Night wishes it had speed skips like this. It's safe to say that Nocturne isn't asking for the same sort of survival strategizing in terms of saves and inventory as, say, Resident Evil. And on a core gameplay front, the lack of that loop of managing items and searching for save points does make it feel like a far more slapped together series of events than a tailored environment for a consistent gameplay loop to take place in. I mean, the game is already split up into 4 segments, which means you're not expected to conserve resources the entire game. The game just kind of throws whatever at you, from long linear stretches of combat, to puzzle obstacle courses, back to combat, back to long puzzle segments. It's paced fairly all over the place, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're just coming into this to see what kind of crazy stuff is going to happen next. It's fortunate that, like the premise that drew me in, the title's series of events is very engaging and delivers on some very creative and intriguing self-contained stories and places to explore. The first mission has Stranger and Svetlana visiting a remote village in Germany and the neighboring vampire castle, having you take the full journey from the village all the way through a werewolf-infested forest to the giant castle far up the mountains. Once you're in the castle, dirty and decrepit, dealing with a huge host of enemies, it feels pretty unsettling. The long pilgrimage to reach the place really makes it feel isolated. You feel a sense you're far away from civilization and in the belly of the beast for real. Svetlana is also a good teammate for Stranger to play off of in this mission, but her potential falls a bit flat at the point she gets turned against Stranger by the vampiric energy of the castle.
What the hell?
After this concept is presented to you, she doesn't reappear until you've dealt with the problem at the castle. As a result, we never actually deal with this evil Svetlana as a problem. She turns evil, and when I played, the next time we see her, she's snapped out of it. So it was weird to introduce this possibility at all. I guess maybe it's just to explain why she doesn't help you at all in the castle. I feel like she'd be better at these jumps. Episode 1 also leaves some elements of its plot unresolved, such as the ultimate fate of the powerful artifact you were sent to retrieve. This ends up being resolved in BloodRayne when Castle Gstaad returns, the artifact in question serving here as the central MacGuffin for the game's finale, with various factions fighting over it. Since there is no Nocturne 2, it's cool that at least this dangling thread got to be, if somewhat unofficially, tied up in BloodRayne. This all also lends credence to the likely possibility that BloodRayne was meant to be a Svetlana game at some point, since Rain gets involved in wrapping up a situation Svetlana was involved with in Nocturne. In this video, I don't want to give away the money shots, so to speak, of each chapter, in case you're looking to play the game yourself. There's always a few neat little twists here and there that keep them all interesting. And there's great imagery I don't want to spoil, especially at the end of the second chapter, for example. This chapter has Stranger visit the Wild West and face off against a town filled with zombies. I got some pretty cool Resident Evil 4 vibes from this place, and we're predating that by over half a decade. This mission involves escorting some townsfolk to safety, which thankfully wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. Just try not to get caught in a tight space with one of them. As I touched on in my talk of cameras and pre-renders, this is a visually impressive game for 1999. It's got pretty detailed models, and those cloth physics are neat. Even when they're clipping, they still make an older game like this pop. Model-wise, it beats the more primitive Silent Hill on PlayStation, but I mean, Silent Hill is just on another level when it comes to atmosphere and art style and imagination. I probably shouldn't even bring that up because I'm going to end up saying it in every review of a horror game. But I think it's pertinent here since both games were released the same year. The pulpy classic horror monster settings of Nocturne are fun, but I don't think it can touch the overwhelming, fleshy, rusty nightmare that was Silent Hill, or the way that game messed with reality itself to unnerve the player. It also can't match Silent Hill's controllable camera, as discussed, but Nocturne still looked impressive for the time, and today retains some very cool moody environments that deliver on the oppressive atmosphere they were going for back then pretty well today still. What doesn't age well are glitches, which this game comes with in spades, unfortunately. Nocturne looks cool, but it's definitely not polished. Whether this may be exacerbated by playing on a modern machine, I can't say. But if you play the game now, you'll likely be facing these issues too, so they're worth bringing up. The worst recurring glitch has characters getting stuck halfway through the in-game cutscenes, meaning those scenes can't continue. Thankfully, you can skip every cutscene to get out of this, but it's a real black mark to have to do that. And then go look up the rest of the scene on YouTube or something where somebody actually managed to make it happen. But don't let that put you off. If you're saving enough, you should be able to beat the game without running into any game breakers. And it's worth it for one of my favorite chapters, Episode 3. Episode 3 gets wild, with Stranger going over to Chicago where Al Capone is resurrecting his dead mobsters Frankenstein style.
He called it Frankenstein's Mobsters.
You team up with a resurrected defector, Ice Pick, and head into the city looking for answers. And immediately it's just all-out hell. The entire city is looking to destroy you. Al Capone does not want Spookhouse in town.
Give me a Manhattan.
What, big guy like you?
The mood here is great. You rock up to a speakeasy and order a drink via code words to get a sit-down with an informant. And oh shit.
Something sinister is going on over there. I'm afraid to take the story to my editor.
Shit was already at 10 and then it goes to 11. Thankfully, the friendly Frankie Ice Pick is of help in this mission, though he too is susceptible to the intense street violence. Ice Pick, no! Stop! Chapter 3 is basically an all-out combat level, while the fourth and final chapter goes hard on the puzzles. And I'll be honest, the game had me on the brink of some serious frustration here. You're asked to go and help out a retired spookhouse member whose land is getting taken over by demons, and you're thrust into a series of cryptic puzzles which a lot of the time have instant death as the punishment. And this was just happening so often that the game's charm was waning a bit at the start of the mansion section of this level. Everywhere I turned, it was just the same old story. Die, die, die. They also take your weapons and items away, so there's extra trouble to deal with here. Have fun solving cryptic puzzles with insta-death punishment while intermittently trying to find the spot the use key will register your nearer ladder. Once you get over the initial disorientation of being lost in this mansion, though, it does end up becoming quite satisfying to conquer its layout and solve some of its cooler puzzles by the end. Just make sure you're quick saving around every turn. I almost forgot to mention that this is a very violent and sexual game. I think you can already see how gory this one is. Blood splattering all over the place. You can pick up bits of corpses. It's a nasty one. In terms of adult sexual content, it even has waist-down female nudity, which you don't get much in video games even today. They're 1999 poly models, so I probably would get away with showing you some of it, but I'll stay on the safe side. You never know how YouTube will react to digital nudity. And yeah, I do find it ridiculous that I'm more likely to get in trouble for showing you a barely discernible vagina on a 20-year-old video game model than all the extreme gore. Either way, I like a kind of rock and roll game like this that tries to push boundaries and play it hardcore. Resident Evil took a while to catch up with the nudity, but that lady was covered in goop and slime, the Japanese video game's inbuilt censor bar. It is worth noting that while Nocturne has some cool ambience, it once again can't touch the crushing dread of Silent Hill, despite much more explicit gore and sexual violence. Food for thought there. So anyway, what you get in this last mission is a condensed Resident Evil mansion to explore, and while it can start off aggravating at the start, it eventually turns into a fun little miniature take on Resi 1 or Alone in the Dark 1. The setup here is really cool too. First off, before you even go on the mission, you can talk to Doc Holliday about this retired spookhouse agent who you're going off to help. You get a really in-depth backstory here, and it's this level of care to think of these neat little details that make the world of Nocturne come alive and have me craving more of it. Later, Stranger is tasked with outwitting a man whose hatred for monsters has driven him insane, creating an entire mansion just to torture them, kind of flipping the premise of the Resident Evil Monster Mansion where the monsters are owning the prior denizens here by creating a place designed to torment the monsters instead. The villain here is also a dark reflection of Stranger, a man who is very prejudiced towards monsters himself, even the friendly ones who do nothing but help him. A sinister potential future for our protagonist. Hopefully Stranger won't go down the same path. I wonder what will become of the Stranger. Guess we'll never know, because after Chapter 4 you get a little epilogue which ends in a to be continued, which will likely never be resolved. Blair Witch takes place before the epilogue and the Stranger's been gone ever since. This is a shame because Nocturne has a perfect setup for recurring adventures. Too good a setup to only get 4 chapters as the Stranger. How easy it is to make new stories for this setup is why it was probably not too hard to shoehorn Nocturne into Blair Witch. There's very little overarching story to Nocturne as it is, and the rather disjointed way Chapter 3 is heavy on action and 4 is heavy on puzzles, and how some side characters get such little time to shine, makes me think this had to be a game with more chapters originally planned, right? Terminal Reality would go on to return to horror, kind of, with a licensed Ghostbusters game and then a Walking Dead game, but after that they closed their doors. Around the time of that Ghostbusters game, they showed off an image of what a then up-to-date Stranger might look like, showing that they still had interest in the franchise. But now that the studio's gone, we're unlikely to see any more of this creative and promising IP. I mean, it has been 20 years. This isn't exactly news, I suppose. So you might think this is the part where I spin a sad yarn for the tragic tale of Nocturne and how it deserved better and how unfortunate it was that it was overlooked and didn't catch on the same way as other horror games. But while yeah, I'd love to see a follow-up to this game, continue the story and do more in the setting, I can see why Nocturne didn't exactly catch on. Nocturne features quality issues and jank that commercial successes like Resident Evil and Silent Hill just don't. I think we actually underappreciate those games for how polished and fine-tuned they are. Those games don't have cumbersome platforming insta-death, puzzles that can trap you and make you reload a save, and glitches that stop cutscenes. Nocturne's biggest challenges don't come from intricate survival mechanics like Resi, they come from crap like bad platforming or unintuitive control issues. I think going the Silent Hill route and creating a game that dials back on survival elements but creates a more polished, easier game that relies on atmosphere, creativity, and cool puzzles to make things compelling would have been better. And ultimately, those latter positive features are what Nocturne has going for it. There's just a lot of cumbersome issues in the way of them. A lot of those issues being mechanics that seem to be there for the sake of challenge, but aren't polished well enough to be satisfying. The lack of a really cathartic, overarching story, I think, also hurts it. When there's no final confrontation or boss fight or major event to wrap things up with, outside of literally a tacked-on cliffhanger, I can see it leaving a slight unsatisfied taste in some people's mouths. Horror classics benefit from a satisfying finale that makes the brutal surviving all worth it. But if you're a hardened survival horror player, I think you can enjoy the positive qualities of Nocturne and overcome some of the issues. And look, I'm pretty sure the game is freeware now, so you have nothing to lose. There's fully rebindable controls, so you can make the game your own, and hopefully have a good time scoping out these cool settings. It was really enjoyable for me to discover and explore this piece of horror gaming history for myself. And the real major downside is that now, I'm part of the club that's sad we didn't get more Stranger Adventures. If you enjoyed this video, I would highly appreciate your backing on Patreon. A big thank you to the backers you're seeing scrolling by right now. Visit patreon.com/thegamingbritshow if you're interested in supporting.